On the morning of April 17, 1995, veteran park ranger Mark Donovan radioed from his pickup, his voice clear and unhurried as he outlined his planned route to dispatch. The forecast called for clear skies and temperatures rising to around 45 degrees Fahrenheit, a perfect day for his scheduled patrol of the remote Pine Valley area, where reports of unusual activity had surfaced in recent weeks. "I'll check out those disturbance reports near the old-growth pines," Mark told dispatch supervisor Janet Collins. "Should be back by sundown." "Copy that," Janet replied. Regular check-ins every 3 hours, per protocol. At 11:43 a.m., Mark made his first scheduled check-in. Everything normal. At 2:37 p.m., he radioed again, his voice still composed. "I'm approaching a clearing about 8 miles northeast of Lookout Point. Something unusual in the undergrowth ahead. Going to investigate and report back." Those were the last words anyone would hear from Mark Donovan. When 3 hours passed without the next scheduled check-in, Janet tried reaching him. No response. She tried again at hourly intervals, her concern growing with each unanswered call. When Mark failed to return by nightfall, Janet alerted Park Supervisor Richard Thornton, who immediately initiated emergency protocols. By dawn the next day, search and rescue teams were combing the forest. Richard Thornton personally coordinated the operation, his weathered face tight with worry. "Mark is like family to me," he told the assembled search teams, voice breaking slightly. "We've worked together for 15 years since I first hired him as a seasonal guide. If anyone can survive out there, it's him." The search expanded over the following days, eventually involving more than 120 personnel, including RCMP officers, park staff, wilderness experts, and volunteers from the nearby town of Jasper. Helicopters swept the forest canopy while ground teams methodically worked through the dense woodland, calling Mark's name into the vast silence. Search dogs tracked his scent to a stream about 9 miles from where his truck had been found, parked exactly where he said he would leave it, keys still in the ignition. The dog handlers found this peculiar. "The scent just stopped," explained K-9 Unit Leader Samantha Brenner. "It's as if he walked to this point and then disappeared into thin air. No indication of direction, no trail leading away. In my 20 years of search and rescue, I've never seen anything quite like it." A week into the search, with no sign of Mark, no backpack, no equipment, no blood trail, nothing, the operation reached a critical juncture. In the Jasper Park headquarters conference room, Richard Thornton faced the grim-faced team leaders. "I know none of us wants to say it," he began, his voice subdued, "but we need to consider what we're all thinking. This time of year, grizzlies are coming out of hibernation. They're hungry, aggressive, territorial." Wildlife biologist Dr. Eleanor Walsh, brought in as a consultant on the search, nodded solemnly. "Bears are incredibly efficient at consuming, and at this time of year, they're desperate for calories after months without food. A predation event would explain the lack of remains." The theory gained immediate traction. The area where Mark disappeared was known grizzly territory, with several sightings reported that spring. Mark was experienced and cautious, but even veteran rangers could find themselves in the wrong place at the wrong time. Perhaps he surprised a bear in that clearing he mentioned. Perhaps he didn't have time to reach for his bear spray. As the search entered its second week, the operation shifted from rescue to recovery. Teams now looked for fragments of clothing, equipment, or anything that might indicate what had happened. The media descended on the small town of Jasper, broadcasting daily updates to a nation increasingly captivated by the mystery. "Ranger missing in Grizzly country," read the headlines. "Veteran outdoorsman presumed victim of bear attack." Local news channels interviewed wildlife experts who emphasized how powerful grizzlies could be, how completely they could eliminate evidence of their prey. A mature male grizzly can crush a moose skull between its jaws, explained one wildlife documentary filmmaker on national television. They have been known to drag prey over a mile from the kill site. The forests of Jasper are vast and dense. Finding evidence would be like looking for a needle in a haystack. Mark's parents arrived from Edmonton, their faces hollow with grief as they stood before the cameras. "Our son loved these mountains," his father said, voice barely audible. He understood the risks. If this is where he was meant to rest, then so be it. Only Mark's younger sister, Sarah, seemed unwilling to accept the bear attack theory. A marine biologist from Vancouver, Sarah arrived 10 days into the search, her eyes fierce behind her glasses as she confronted Richard Thornton. "There has to be more to this," she insisted. Mark was too experienced to be caught off guard by a bear. He always carried bear spray, made noise when approaching blind spots. "This doesn't make sense." Thornton placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "I understand, Sarah. None of us wants to believe it. But I've seen what grizzlies can do. The timing fits. They're hungriest and most aggressive this time of year. The location fits. That area has one of the highest concentrations of grizzlies in the park. And the silence fits. No distress call. No struggle. It would have been quick." The search continued for 45 days, covering more than 200 square kilometers of remote wilderness. As spring advanced into early summer, the operation gradually wound down. The RCMP officially classified the case as a probable fatal animal attack, though they kept the file technically open in the absence of confirmed remains. In the town of Jasper, the community mourned. Mark had been well-liked, the kind of ranger who took time to chat with visitors, who volunteered at the local school's outdoor education program, who organized an annual cleanup of popular hiking trails. A memorial service was held at the park's visitor center with hundreds in attendance. Richard Thornton delivered a moving eulogy, his voice catching as he described Mark's dedication to preserving the wilderness he loved. "Mark understood something fundamental about these mountains," Thornton told the hushed gathering. "He knew they were both beautiful and dangerous, nurturing and deadly. He respected that duality. In some ways, it's fitting that he became part of this landscape he cherished so deeply." Life in Jasper gradually returned to normal. Tourism season began, bringing the usual influx of visitors eager to experience the park's majestic beauty. New safety protocols were implemented for solo ranger patrols, including more frequent radio check-ins and GPS tracking devices. Mark's position was filled by a new ranger, though veterans of the Park Service would sometimes share stories about him with reverent tones around campfires. The only person who seemed unable to move on was Sarah Donovan. After the memorial service, she remained in Jasper, renting a small cabin on the outskirts of town. She requested and was granted access to all reports related to her brother's disappearance, spending hours poring over maps of the search area, weather conditions, and wildlife sighting reports. Park staff treated her with gentle patience, attributing her behavior to the particular cruelty of having no body to bury, no definitive answers to grasp. Richard Thornton especially took time to check on her, bringing coffee and sitting with her as she studied the files. "I know it's hard without closure," he told her one evening as rain tapped against the windows of her cabin. "But sometimes nature doesn't give us the answers we want." Sarah looked up from a topographical map, her eyes red-rimmed from strain. "It's not just that, Richard. It's these inconsistencies that keep nagging at me." Mark's last radio call, he said he saw something unusual in the undergrowth. "Not an animal, something." "In my experience," Thornton replied gently, "when rangers say something unusual, they often mean signs of animal activity they can't immediately identify. Tracks, scat, disturbed vegetation. But what if it wasn't? What if it was something else entirely?" Sarah pressed. Thornton sighed. "Sarah, I understand the need to find meaning in tragedy, but sometimes the simplest explanation is the correct one. The evidence points to a bear encounter. Mark was in grizzly territory during their most aggressive season. No ranger, no matter how experienced, is immune to the risks of this wilderness. Eventually, Sarah returned to Vancouver, taking with her copies of reports, maps, and her own extensive notes. Her colleagues at the Marine Research Institute noticed a change in her, a new intensity, an obsessive attention to detail, a tendency to work alone late into the night. When asked about her brother, she would offer only brief, non-committal responses before changing the subject. For 3 years, the case of Mark Donovan faded from public consciousness, becoming just another sad footnote in the long history of wilderness tragedies. The Canadian wilderness, beautiful but unforgiving, occasionally claimed lives. It was a reality that everyone who ventured into its depths understood and accepted. Then, in July 1998, an unexpected discovery reignited interest in the forgotten case. Klaus Weber, a German wildlife photographer, was on a solo hiking trip in Jasper's northern sector, hoping to capture images of the park's elusive wildlife. An experienced outdoorsman, Weber knew to keep his distance when, through his telephoto lens, he spotted a large grizzly bear digging vigorously at something in a small clearing. From a safe vantage point approximately 200 yards away, Weber began filming the bear's behavior, intrigued by its focused digging. After several minutes, a sudden gust of wind carried Weber's scent to the animal. The bear's reaction surprised the photographer. Instead of displaying the territorial aggression typical of grizzlies protecting a food source, the animal abruptly ceased digging, looked directly at Weber, and then lumbered away into the dense forest. Curiosity overcoming caution, Weber approached the site after ensuring the bear was gone. In the shallow pit the animal had excavated, partially buried in the damp earth and covered with moss, lay a black rectangular device with a broken antenna, a Park Service radio, standard issue for Jasper Rangers. Weber, unaware of its significance, took the radio to the nearest ranger station. When the attending ranger saw the faded initials MD scratched into the back of the device, his face paled visibly. Within hours, the discovery became headline news across Canada. "Missing Rangers radio found in bear's cache," proclaimed the Edmonton Journal. "Tragic end to 3-year mystery," declared the national news networks. The RCMP announced they would formally close the case, with the radio providing what they considered definitive evidence of Mark Donovan's fate. At a press conference in Jasper, Sergeant William Cooper of the RCMP stood before a bank of microphones. The discovery of Ranger Donovan's radio in what appears to be a bear's food cache confirms our original assessment of the case. While we may never recover remains, we can now provide the family with the closure they deserve. The investigation is officially concluded. Richard Thornton, standing alongside Cooper, added his own comments. "This discovery, while painful, validates what we've believed happened to Mark. Grizzlies are known to bury items associated with their prey, sometimes returning to these caches months or even years later. The location where the radio was found is less than 2 kilometers from Mark's last reported position, while within the range a bear might transport its prey." Wildlife experts quickly supported this interpretation. Dr. Eleanor Walsh, the same biologist who had consulted during the original search, explained to reporters, "Bears have complex behaviors around food sources. They'll often cache items for later consumption, and they're attracted to unusual scents and objects. Finding the radio but no human remains is completely consistent with bear predation patterns, especially given the 3 years that have elapsed. The story might have ended there, a mystery solved, a case closed, a tragedy explained. But when Sarah Donovan saw the news report in her Vancouver apartment, she felt something stir within her, not closure, but its opposite, a door creaking open on a case she had never truly abandoned. The next morning, she booked a flight to Edmonton, then rented a car for the 4-hour drive to Jasper. She had questions about this convenient discovery, questions that had simmered in her mind for 3 years. And this time, she was determined to find answers, no matter where they led. As her car climbed the winding mountain roads toward Jasper, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that her brother's final radio message about something unusual in the undergrowth might have been more significant than anyone realized. Perhaps what Mark had discovered that day wasn't a hungry grizzly emerging from hibernation, but something far more dangerous. Perhaps the predator that took her brother walked on 2 legs, not 4. The setting sun cast long shadows across the mountains as Sarah drove into Jasper, the familiar silhouette of the visitor center coming into view. Somewhere in these forests, her brother had vanished without a trace. Somewhere in this small town, someone might know more than they had ever revealed. Sarah pulled into the parking lot of the Jasper Inn, her face set with determination. The bear theory had never satisfied her. Now, with the discovery of Mark's radio, she had the first tangible lead in years, not an ending, but a beginning. As she checked into her room, Sarah made a silent promise to her brother. This time she wouldn't leave until she discovered the truth. What she couldn't know was how dangerous that truth would prove to be, or how far certain people would go to keep it buried. Sarah Donovan stood in the exact spot where Klaus Weber had filmed the grizzly bear 3 weeks earlier. The forest around her was quiet save for the occasional rustle of wind through pine needles and the distant call of a raven. Yellow police tape, now sagging between trees, marked where the RCMP had conducted their brief examination before officially closing the case. "Show me exactly where you were standing when you filmed the bear," Sarah asked Weber, who had generously agreed to meet her at the site. The German photographer, tall and lean with a weathered face that spoke of countless hours in the wilderness, pointed to a rocky outcrop about 200 yards away. "There. I had set up hoping to photograph elk, but then noticed the bear digging. It was unusual behavior, very focused, not the random foraging you typically see." Sarah knelt beside the shallow depression where her brother's radio had been found. The RCMP had sifted through the soil but conducted no deeper excavation, satisfied that they had found the evidence they needed to confirm their bear attack theory. The surrounding vegetation had already begun reclaiming the disturbed earth. "Did anyone from the Park Service or police ask to see your entire video?" Sarah asked, running her fingers through the moist soil. Weber frowned. "They watched it on my camera at the visitor center, but only the part with the bear digging. The supervisor, Thornton, I believe, seemed most interested in confirming it was a grizzly, not a black bear." Sarah stood, brushing dirt from her hands. "I'd like to see the complete footage, if you don't mind." Every frame. Back in her hotel room that evening, Sarah connected Weber's camera to her laptop. The footage began with several minutes of empty forest before the bear came into frame. Sarah watched intently as the animal approached the site and began digging with clear purpose. When the wind shifted and the bear fled, Weber's camera continued recording as he cautiously approached the dig site. Sarah replayed the sequence several times, focusing not on the bear but on the surroundings. On the third viewing, something caught her eye, a flash of unnatural color at the edge of the frame, just visible through the undergrowth perhaps 20 feet from the dig site. She paused, enhanced the image, and leaned closer. It was rope. Synthetic climbing rope, the bright blue kind used by the Park Service. The next morning, Sarah met with Sergeant William Cooper at the local RCMP detachment. Now nearing retirement, Cooper had been the lead investigator on her brother's case and had officially closed the file following the radio discovery. "Ms. Donovan, I understand your continued concern, but we've followed protocol throughout this investigation," Cooper explained, his voice carrying the practiced patience of a man who had delivered disappointing news to families many times before. "The discovery of your brother's radio in what was clearly a bear's cache site confirms what wildlife experts told us was the most likely scenario from the beginning." Sarah placed her laptop on Cooper's desk and played Weber's enhanced footage. "Do you see that?" she asked, pointing to the blue fragment. "That's Park Service rope, standard issue. It wasn't scattered or torn like you'd expect if a bear had been involved." It looks deliberately placed. Cooper leaned forward, squinting at the screen. For a moment, his professional detachment wavered. I wasn't shown this part of the footage. I'd like to request a proper excavation of the site, Sarah said. And I want to be present when it happens. Cooper shifted uncomfortably. That would require authorization from both the RCMP and Park Administration. With the case officially closed, it would be difficult to justify the resources. Then tell me what it would take to reopen the case. Cooper studied her for a long moment. Substantial new evidence suggesting foul play. More than a glimpse of what might be rope and underexposed footage. Sarah left the RCMP office frustrated but not deterred. If official channels wouldn't help, she would find another way. She spent the afternoon in the town's small library, searching through archived newspapers from April 1995. The coverage of Mark's disappearance was extensive, but one detail caught her attention. In the earliest reports, before the bear attack theory had fully taken hold, there was mention of suspicious activity Mark had been investigating in the northern sector. The next day, Sarah visited the Park Administration building, requesting access to her brother's work logs and reports from the weeks leading up to his disappearance. The young administrator seemed hesitant. Those would be archived records. I'm not sure I have authorization to release them without approval from Supervisor Thornton. They pertain to my brother, and I've been given access to his records before, Sarah countered. Let me make a call. 20 minutes later, Richard Thornton himself appeared, his ranger uniform crisp, his expression a careful blend of sympathy and authority. Sarah, it's good to see you again, though I wish it were under better circumstances. He gestured toward a small conference room. Let's talk privately. Once they were seated, Thornton folded his hands on the table. I understand you're requesting Mark's work records. Yes. I want to know what suspicious activity he was investigating when he disappeared. It was mentioned in early news reports, but that angle seemed to disappear once everyone decided a bear was responsible. Thornton's expression softened. That was standard language for possible rule violations, usually campers in restricted areas or minor infractions. Nothing sinister. Then you shouldn't have any problem letting me see the reports. A flicker of something annoyance? Concern? Crossed Thornton's face before his professional demeanor reasserted itself. Those records have been archived. It would take time to retrieve them, and frankly, I'm concerned about reopening these wounds for you. The discovery of Mark's radio should bring closure, not new questions. Richard, Sarah said, leaning forward, you were his friend for 15 years. Don't you want to be absolutely certain about what happened to him? Thornton's gaze didn't waver. I am certain, Sarah. I've seen the evidence, consulted with wildlife experts, and followed this case from the beginning. Mark was in the wrong place at the wrong time. It's tragic, but it's the reality of working in this wilderness. That evening, Sarah received an unexpected visitor at her hotel. Janet Collins, the dispatch supervisor who had received Mark's final radio transmission, stood awkwardly in the doorway. I heard you were back in town, Janet said, asking questions. Sarah invited her in, noting the woman's nervous glances down the hallway. I shouldn't be here, Janet began once the door was closed. But there's something that's bothered me for 3 years. Something I never told the investigators because it seemed irrelevant at the time. Sarah waited silently, afraid that any interruption might cause Janet to reconsider. That day, Mark's last check-in, he said he saw something unusual in the undergrowth, his exact words. But there was more to the transmission that wasn't in my official report. Janet twisted her hands in her lap. Before signing off, he lowered his voice and added, Tell Thornton I found what he doesn't want found. It's worse than we thought. Then he was gone. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. What did you think he meant? I assumed it was some environmental violation, illegal camping, maybe poaching. Mark was passionate about protecting the park. But when I mentioned it to Richard after Mark disappeared, he seemed disturbed. Mark must have been confused that there was no special investigation. He told me to leave it out of my report, that it would only complicate the search. And you did. Janet looked down. Richard was my supervisor. And when the bear theory emerged, it seemed to make sense. Why complicate things with an obscure message that probably had nothing to do with what happened? After Janet left, Sarah couldn't sleep. Her brother's final cryptic message played in her mind on endless repeat. Tell Thornton I found what he doesn't want found. It's worse than we thought. The next morning, Sarah drove to the trailhead where Mark had parked his truck on that final day. The location was marked with a small memorial plaque installed by the Park Service. From there, she followed the trail he would have taken, a moderately difficult path that wound through dense forest before opening into a series of connected meadows. 4 miles in, she encountered another hiker heading back toward the trailhead. A middle-aged man with a gray beard and the deliberate movements of someone who knew these trails well. "Beautiful day," he commented as they passed. Sarah nodded in agreement, then on impulse called after him. "Excuse me, do you hike here often?" The man stopped. "Every week for 20 years. It's my church. Did you know Mark Donovan? The ranger who disappeared here in '95. The man's expression shifted. "Everyone around here knew Mark. Good man. Shame what happened." "What do you think happened?" The hiker glanced around before answering, his voice lower. "The official story? Bear attack. But Mark was smarter than that. Too experienced." He hesitated. "There were rumors, you know, before he disappeared, about conflicts with some locals." "What kind of conflicts?" "Mark was a by-the-book ranger. Issued citations when rules were broken, no exceptions. Made enemies among certain types hunters primarily. There was one fellow, Carl Mencken, who threatened Mark right in the middle of the general store after getting his 3rd citation. Said Mark was asking for a bullet if he didn't back off." Sarah felt a chill despite the warm day. "Was this reported to the police?" The hiker shrugged. "Probably. But Mencken has friends in the department. And once the bear theory took hold, no one bothered looking at alternatives." That afternoon, Sarah visited the local general store where the same family had operated the business for generations. The elderly owner, Martha Jenkins, remembered Mark fondly. Such a polite young man. Always had a kind word, even when he was exhausted from those long patrols. Martha sighed. "This town lost something when he vanished. I heard there was an incident here between Mark and a man named Mencken." Martha's smile faded. "Who told you about that?" "A hiker I met on the trail. He said Mencken threatened my brother." Martha glanced toward the store entrance before responding. "Carl Mencken has a temper. Always has. Mark caught him hunting in a restricted area, confiscated an illegal trap. Carl came in here ranting about how Mark was destroying his livelihood, how he'd teach that ranger a lesson. Did the police investigate him after Mark disappeared? They questioned him, sure. But Carl had an alibi, claimed he was at a hunting cabin with friends that whole weekend. And once they decided it was a bear, ... double quotes, Martha trailed off. Sarah spent the next day researching Carl Mencken. Local court records showed multiple citations for hunting violations, all issued by Mark Donovan in the year preceding his disappearance. The most recent, just 2 weeks before Mark vanished, involved an illegal trap in the same northern sector where Mark had disappeared. When Sarah brought this information to Sergeant Cooper, his initial dismissiveness gave way to reluctant interest. Mencken was questioned, Cooper confirmed, reviewing the original case file. His alibi checked out. 3 friends confirmed he was at a cabin 50 miles from where Mark disappeared. Friends who might lie for him? Cooper frowned. Possibly. But without evidence placing him at the scene, we had nothing to pursue. And all evidence pointed to an animal attack. What about the rope I showed you in Weber's video? What about Mark's final message to dispatch? Cooper closed the file. I'll look into Mencken's alibi again. But I need you to understand something. Ms. Donovan reopening this case officially would require more than circumstantial connections. Sarah's investigation took an unexpected turn the following day when she received an anonymous note at her hotel. Northern Ridge Trail, mile marker 16, midnight. Come alone if you want the truth about your brother. Every instinct told Sarah this was dangerous, potentially a trap. Yet the possibility of learning what happened to Mark overrode her caution. She prepared carefully hiking boots, warm clothes, a powerful flashlight, and a canister of bear spray. She also left a sealed envelope with the hotel clerk, to be opened if she didn't return by morning, containing everything she had discovered so far. The Northern Ridge Trail was deserted when Sarah arrived shortly before midnight. A three-quarter moon provided enough light to navigate without her flashlight, which she kept off to avoid announcing her presence. Mile marker 16 was located in a small clearing surrounded by towering pines. Sarah positioned herself with her back to a large boulder, scanning the darkness for movement. At precisely midnight, a figure emerged from the trees on the opposite side of the clearing. In the moonlight, Sarah could make out the shape of a man in a hunting jacket, his face obscured by shadow. "Are you alone?" the figure called. "Yes," Sarah answered, her hand on the bear spray in her pocket. "Who are you?" The man stepped forward, and Sarah recognized him from photographs in the court records. Carl Mencken, late 50s, with a weathered face and cold eyes. "You've been asking questions about me," Mencken said, digging into ancient history. "Did you kill my brother?" Mencken's laugh was harsh in the quiet forest, straight to the point. "I respect that." He moved closer, stopping about 10 feet away. "No, I didn't kill Mark. Wanted to after he cost me a season's worth of traps. But someone beat me to it." Sarah's grip tightened on the bear spray. "What do you know?" "I know your brother wasn't killed by any bear. I know he was poking around where he shouldn't have been. And I know who didn't want him finding what he found. Tell me." Mencken's expression hardened. "Information has a price. I don't have much money, but not talking about money. I want immunity. Written guarantee from the RCMP that I won't be charged for anything I reveal. That would require reopening the case. Officially." "Exactly." Mencken glanced over his shoulder as if checking they were still alone. "Your brother discovered something in these woods that certain people would kill to keep secret. I've kept my mouth shut for 3 years because I value breathing. But I'm leaving Canada next month, moving down to Montana. Before I go, I'd like to clear my conscience. What did Mark find? Get me that immunity deal. Then we'll talk." Mencken backed toward the trees. "You have 3 days. Same time, same place. Come alone and bring the paperwork. Or don't come at all." After Mencken disappeared into the forest, Sarah remained in the clearing, her mind racing. She had come seeking answers about a bear attack and instead found hints of a conspiracy. Mencken was clearly no innocent his animosity toward. Mark was well documented, but his claim that someone else had killed her brother rang true. Why else would he risk meeting her in secret? The next morning, Sarah presented her findings to Sergeant Cooper, the rope in Weber's video, Janet Collins' revelation about Mark's final message, and now Mencken's claim that Mark was murdered. Cooper listened with growing concern. "This changes things," he admitted. "But an immunity deal for Mencken? That's beyond my authority. I'd need to convince my superiors to formally reopen the case. And they'll want more concrete evidence." "Then let's get it," Sarah insisted. "Authorize an excavation of the site where Weber found the radio. If Mark was murdered and buried there, there might be forensic evidence even after 3 years. Cooper hesitated. "That would require Park Service approval. The location is within park boundaries. Then let's get Thornton to approve it." Cooper's expression was unreadable. "I'll speak with him. But given the sensitive nature of these allegations, perhaps you should keep a low profile until we have something concrete." Sarah spent the next day in her hotel room, reviewing everything she had learned. If Mark had been murdered, who had the motive and opportunity? Mencken had a clear grudge, but he also had an alibi, and his current behavior suggested he knew who the real killer was rather than being the killer himself. What had Mark discovered that was worth killing for? The suspicious activity he had been investigating remained undefined. Sarah needed access to his work records to understand what he had been focused on in those final weeks. That evening, Sarah's laptop chimed with an incoming email from Klaus Weber. The subject line read simply, "Watch the whole video again." The message contained a link to a cloud storage site where Weber had uploaded the complete, unedited footage from that day in the forest. "I've been thinking about our conversation," his message read. "There was something else unusual that I noticed only when reviewing the footage at home. Something I didn't mention to the authorities because it seemed unrelated to the bear." Sarah downloaded the video and began watching. The first part was familiar, the bear digging, then fleeing when it caught Weber's scent. Weber's approach to the dig site, the discovery of the radio. But the footage continued after what she had previously seen. As Weber panned his camera around the clearing, documenting the site before reporting his find, he captured a series of unusual markings on a nearby tree trunk. Initially, they resembled bear claw marks, vertical gouges in the bark. But upon closer inspection, they appeared too regular, too precisely spaced. Sarah enlarged the image. These weren't claw marks. They were man-made cuts, deliberate and patterned. And at the base of the tree, partially obscured by underbrush but visible when the image was enhanced, was what appeared to be the corner of a metal object buried in the soil. Heart racing, Sarah picked up her phone to call Sergeant Cooper. Before she could dial, a text message appeared on her screen from an unknown number. "Stop digging or you'll join your brother. Last warning." Sarah stared at the message, a cold realization settling over her. Someone was watching her, tracking her movements, monitoring her communications. Someone who knew what she had discovered and was afraid of what she might find next. The bear theory was unraveling thread by thread. In its place, a darker, more sinister explanation was emerging, one that suggested her brother had been silenced deliberately. His death disguised as a wilderness tragedy, his body hidden where no one would think to look for human remains. And whoever was responsible was still out there, still protecting their secret, still willing to kill to keep it buried. Sarah set down her phone and looked out her hotel window at the mountains silhouetted against the night sky. She had come to Jasper seeking closure, but instead found herself at the center of a mystery deeper and more dangerous than she had imagined. The truth about what happened to Mark was out there in those forests, and despite the threat, she was now more determined than ever to find it. Tomorrow she would meet with Sergeant Cooper again, show him Weber's complete footage, and demand action. If the official investigation wouldn't move forward quickly enough, she would return to the site herself. Something was buried near that tree, something the killer had never retrieved. Something that might finally reveal what Mark had discovered in his final hours. What Sarah didn't realize was that her investigation had already set in motion events that couldn't be stopped. Forces that had remained dormant for 3 years were now awakening. And the peaceful town of Jasper was about to confront a darkness it had never acknowledged. A truth more terrible than any bear attack could ever be. Dawn broke over Jasper with a steely gray light filtering through low clouds. Sarah stood at her hotel window, watching the town slowly come to life. Shop owners unlocking doors, early morning hikers adjusting backpacks, a park service truck making its way down the main street. In her hand, her phone displayed the threatening text message she'd received the night before. After hours of deliberation, she had decided not to delete it. Evidence. That's what this was now. At the RCMP detachment, Sergeant Cooper studied Weber's complete video footage with growing concern. The markings on the tree were clearly man-made, and the partially buried metal object at the base couldn't be explained away as animal activity. "We need to excavate that site immediately," Cooper said, his earlier reluctance replaced by professional urgency. "These markings, combined with everything else you've brought forward, constitute sufficient grounds to reopen the investigation. What about Thornton? We need his approval for excavation on parkland. Cooper closed his laptop. Under normal circumstances, yes. But given the nature of these developments, particularly that threatening text you received, I'm going to request emergency authorization from federal authorities. It will take a few hours. And Mencken? What about the immunity deal he's requesting? I've spoken with my superiors. If his information leads to resolution of a homicide, we can offer limited immunity for any crimes he might reveal in the process of providing testimony. Cooper handed Sarah a document. This preliminary agreement should satisfy him, though it will require formal approval once we know exactly what he's offering. That evening, Sarah returned to the Northern Ridge Trail, the immunity document secure in her jacket pocket. The forest felt different at night, each shadow deeper, each sound amplified in the darkness. When she reached mile marker 16, Mencken was already waiting, a cigarette's orange glow briefly illuminating his face. "You got it?" he asked without greeting. Sarah handed him the document. Mencken read it carefully by flashlight, then nodded. "This'll do. Conditional on my information being verified, but that's fair enough. Now tell me what you know about my brother." Mencken extinguished his cigarette against a tree trunk. "First, understand I'm no saint. I've poached, set illegal traps, broken plenty of park regulations. Your brother and I had our issues, but I respected that he was just doing his job. Never wished him dead. But you know who did kill him. Not with certainty. But I know what he found and who had reason to silence him." Mencken glanced around before continuing. 3 weeks before your brother disappeared, I was checking my traps, illegal ones, in a restricted area about 12 miles north of here. I heard machinery where there shouldn't have been any, followed the sound. Found a clearing that wasn't on any map, with logging equipment and fresh-cut timber stockpiled under camouflage tarps. Sarah frowned. Illegal logging? In a national park? Not just any trees. Old-growth pines, centuries old, protected species. Worth a fortune on the black market. The kind of wood that gets shipped to Asia and sold for thousands per board foot. Mencken's voice lowered. I was photographing the operation when your brother showed up. Nearly scared me to death. He'd been tracking the same sounds. We weren't exactly friends, but in that moment, we had a common interest. What happened? Mark confiscated my camera, but said he wouldn't cite me if I kept quiet about what we'd found. Said he'd been tracking suspicious activity for weeks, building a case. Said it went deeper than just illegal cutting, that someone inside the Park Service had to be involved, authorizing selective maintenance that was actually cover for the operation. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. Did he mention who? No names. But he was worried. Said he'd taken his concerns to his supervisor weeks earlier and been told to drop it, that it was being handled at a higher level. Mencken lit another cigarette, his hand slightly unsteady. 2 days later, the clearing was emptied, equipment gone, logs removed, area partially revegetated to hide the evidence. Week after that, Mark disappeared. And you never came forward with this? To who? The same Park Service that might be involved? The local RCMP who dismissed me as a troublemaker with a grudge against rangers? Mencken exhaled a cloud of smoke. Besides, I had no proof. Mark had my camera, and I'm guessing whoever killed him found it and destroyed it. So I kept my head down, stayed alive. Sarah processed this information in silence. If Mencken was telling the truth, Mark had stumbled upon an illegal logging operation potentially protected by someone within the Park Service itself. Someone with enough authority to cover it up. Someone who had been involved in the search from the beginning. There's one more thing, Mencken added. The clearing where we found the logging operation? It's less than a mile from where your brother disappeared. The next morning, Sarah met Cooper at the excavation site. A small team of our CMP forensic specialists was already at work around the tree Weber had filmed. The area had been cordoned off, and officers documented every step of the process with photographs and detailed notes. "We've already recovered several items," Cooper informed her, leading her to a folding table where evidence bags were laid out. Fragments of synthetic rope consistent with Park Service equipment, a broken knife blade, and this. He pointed to a small evidence bag containing what appeared to be a metal tag with a serial number. "It's from a chainsaw," Cooper explained. "High-end commercial model, not something a typical camper or even a poacher would carry. We're tracing the serial number now." The forensic team worked methodically, removing layers of soil from around the tree base. By mid-afternoon, they had uncovered the metal object partially visible in Weber's video, a steel case, approximately 18 inches square, locked and partially corroded from years in the damp earth. When the lock was carefully broken, the case revealed its contents: a digital camera wrapped in waterproof material, a notebook in a sealed plastic bag, and a set of memory cards labeled with dates. "The camera belongs to Mencken," Cooper confirmed after examining it. "His name and contact information are engraved on the bottom." The notebook, though water-damaged, was still largely legible, marked Donovan's field journal from the weeks leading up to his disappearance. The final entries detailed his growing suspicions about unauthorized activity in the northern sector, coordinates of sites where he had found evidence of heavy equipment usage, and references to selective maintenance authorizations that didn't match official park records. The last entry, dated the day before he vanished, was the most disturbing. Confirmed RT connection to North Pine Industries. Documentation on SD card. Meeting with him tomorrow to confront before taking everything to federal authorities. RT, Sarah whispered. Richard Thornton. Cooper's expression hardened. "Let's check the memory cards." Back at the RCMP detachment, they reviewed the contents of the SD cards. Most contained photographs documenting environmental violations, illegal campsites, trash dumping, minor infractions. But one card, labeled with the date 3 days before Mark's disappearance, told a different story. The images showed a clearing deep in the forest with industrial logging equipment bearing the North Pine Industries logo. Several photos captured stacks of massive pine logs, each bearing a tag indicating species and grade. Most damning were images of Richard Thornton himself, clearly identifiable in his Park Service uniform, examining the logs with several men in North Pine jackets. The final images showed documents spread on the hood of a truck permits with Thornton's signature authorizing forest management in protected areas, along with what appeared to be payment records showing substantial sums transferred to an offshore account. Cooper immediately called his superiors. Within an hour, the small detachment buzzed with activity as additional officers arrived. Search warrants were prepared for Thornton's office and home, and surveillance was established to track his movements. "We need to move carefully," Cooper told Sarah. "If Thornton realizes we've discovered this evidence, he might flee or destroy additional documentation. I want you to stay here while we execute the warrants." Sarah reluctantly agreed, watching from the detachment window as Cooper and 4 officers departed for the park administration building. The minutes crawled by with excruciating slowness. An hour passed. Then 2. When Cooper finally returned, his grim expression told her something had gone wrong. Thornton wasn't at his office or home. His secretary said he left suddenly after receiving a phone call claiming a family emergency. His car was found at the Echo Bay trailhead, but there's no sign of him on the main trails. "He's running," Sarah said. "We've already dispatched search teams with tracking dogs. Every exit from the park is being monitored." "He won't get far." Cooper hesitated. "There's something else. We found financial records in his office, safe evidence of payments from North Pine Industries going back 11 years. This wasn't a recent operation. It was a long-term criminal enterprise. And my brother discovered it." "Yes, and based on what we're seeing, the operation was massive select harvesting of old growth trees worth tens of millions." Thornton's offshore accounts showed deposits totaling over $5 million. The search for Thornton continued through the night and into the following day. Helicopter teams scanned the backcountry while ground units with dogs worked the most likely escape routes. By afternoon, the perimeter had been expanded to include the entire northern sector of the park. Sarah, unable to remain idle at the detachment, convinced Cooper to let her join one of the search teams. She was paired with 2 experienced officers and assigned to check a series of emergency cabins along the park's northern boundary. The first 2 cabins were empty. At the third, a small, seldom used shelter near Blackwater Creek, they found signs of recent occupation: still warm ashes in the fireplace, food wrappers, and an empty water bottle. As they radioed this information to Cooper, Sarah noticed something partially concealed beneath the cabin's single-cot weathered backpack. When an officer carefully removed it, the faded initials "Me" were visible on the front pocket. Mark's backpack, missing for 3 years, now found in a cabin where Thornton had recently been hiding. Before the officers could stop her, Sarah unzipped the pack. Inside was her brother's Park Service tablet, seemingly untouched since the day he disappeared. When she powered it on, it requested a password. "April 17 Ruby," Sarah said aloud, typing the combination, their mother's birth date and childhood dog's name, Mark's standard password. The tablet unlocked, revealing dozens of photos, videos, and text documents. As Sarah scrolled through the files, one video stood out dated the day Mark disappeared, titled simply "Evidence Final." Her hands trembling, she played the recording. Mark's face filled the screen, his expression solemn. He was clearly in the forest, trees visible behind him. "If you're watching this, something's happened to me," he began. "I've documented extensive illegal logging operations in the protected old-growth sections of the northern sector. Multiple sites, coordinated harvesting, all approved on paper as routine forest management. The operation is being run by Richard Thornton in partnership with North Pine Industries. I've gathered financial records, unauthorized permits, and photographic evidence, all stored on this tablet and backed up to my personal email account." Mark's image glanced over his shoulder before continuing. "I confronted Richard 2 days ago with preliminary evidence. He claimed ignorance, said he would help investigate. I pretended to believe him while gathering final documentation. Today I'm meeting him at the North Clearing to show him what I've found and give him a chance to turn himself in before I take everything to federal authorities." There was a pause as Mark seemed to consider his next words carefully. "If something happens to me, look for the evidence where we buried Ranger Thompson's old service dog. Richard won't know about that spot." The video ended abruptly. Sarah sat motionless, her brother's final message echoing in her mind. She knew exactly where he meant, a small meadow near headquarters where they had buried the beloved canine officer after 16 years of service. Mark had helped dig the grave during his first year as a ranger. Within an hour, an RCMP forensic team was excavating the site Mark had referenced. Under a small cairn of stones, they found a waterproof container holding duplicates of all the evidence on Mark's tablet, along with additional financial records and correspondence between Thornton and North Pine executives. The evidence was damning and complete proof, not just of the illegal logging operation, but of Thornton's central role in organizing and protecting it. What remained unclear was the exact circumstances of Mark's death. That question was answered the following morning when Thornton was finally apprehended attempting to cross the park boundary through a remote mountain pass. Exhausted, dehydrated, and injured from a fall, he offered no resistance. During initial questioning, Thornton maintained his innocence, claiming he had fled out of panic when he realized he was under investigation. But when presented with the accumulated evidence, Mark's video statement, the financial records, the photographs, and most damning of all, Mark's backpack found in the cabin where Thornton had hidden his composure, finally broke. "It wasn't supposed to happen like that," Thornton said, his voice barely audible. "Mark was my friend. I tried to keep him out of the northern sector, assigned him elsewhere whenever possible. But he was too damn thorough, too dedicated. You killed him, Cooper stated flatly. Thornton stared at his hands. He called me that morning, said he had evidence that would end my career and put me in prison. Said he was giving me one chance to explain before he went to the authorities. I met him at the clearing as he requested. Tried to convince him the operation was beneficial selective harvesting, minimal impact, funds supporting park programs unofficially. Thornton's voice hardened. He wouldn't listen. Said what we were doing was destroying irreplaceable ecosystems that the old-growth pines took centuries to develop. He had his tablet, showed me the documentation he'd compiled. When I realized how thorough he'd been, how completely he could destroy everything ... What happened next? Cooper pressed. I had a forestry shovel in my truck. When Mark turned to show me something on his tablet, Thornton couldn't finish the sentence. After a long silence, he continued. Buried him deep, took his equipment, made it look like he had disappeared on patrol. I knew the area's history of bear attacks would provide a convenient explanation. And you led the search, Sarah said from where she sat in the corner of the interrogation room. Cooper had reluctantly allowed her to observe. Yes, Thornton wouldn't meet her eyes. I made sure the search teams never came close to the actual location. When weeks passed with no discovery, I pushed the bear attack theory. Everyone accepted it eventually. Except you. Thornton's full confession revealed the extent of the operation. For more than a decade, he had authorized forest management in protected areas that was actually targeted harvesting of valuable old-growth trees. North Pine Industries handled the cutting and transport, disguising the logs as legally harvested timber from their legitimate operations elsewhere. The scheme had yielded over $30 million in profit, with Thornton receiving a percentage for his crucial role in providing access and cover. Most disturbing was Thornton's revelation that Mark wasn't his first victim. 2 other park employees who had stumbled upon aspects of the operation in previous years had also disappeared. Their deaths similarly attributed to wilderness accidents or animal attacks. These cold cases were immediately reopened. Based on Thornton's confession, authorities located Mark's remains buried deep in the forest floor near where Weber had found the radio. Forensic examination confirmed Thornton's account blunt force trauma to the back of the skull, consistent with a strike from a forestry shovel. The radio had been buried separately, less deeply, explaining how the bear had uncovered it years later. In the weeks that followed, the investigation expanded beyond Jasper. North Pine executives were arrested, financial records were seized, and the full scope of the criminal enterprise was exposed. The case made national headlines, not just for the murder of a park ranger, but for the environmental crimes that had motivated it, the destruction of protected old-growth forest for profit. For Sarah, the resolution brought a complex mixture of emotions. The vindication of her suspicions and the justice for her brother came at the cost of confronting the brutal truth of his final moments. The bear attack theory, which had provided at least some comfort in its impersonal randomness, had been replaced by something far more disturbing: the calculated betrayal by a trusted friend and colleague. 6 months after Thornton's arrest, Sarah stood at the newly established memorial for Mark in the heart of Jasper National Park. The bronze plaque detailed not only his service as a dedicated ranger, but his ultimate sacrifice in defense of the wilderness he had sworn to protect. Beside the plaque grew a young pine sapling, planted from seeds of the very old-growth trees Mark had died trying to save. The criminal trials were still ongoing. Thornton had pleaded guilty to 3 counts of first-degree murder and faced life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. North Pine executives and corrupt officials implicated in the scheme were fighting charges ranging from environmental crimes to conspiracy and obstruction of justice. As for the bear that had unwittingly helped expose the truth by digging up Mark's radio wildlife, biologists believed it was likely the same animal captured on remote cameras in the area. The mature male grizzly continued to roam the northern sector, now protected by enhanced conservation measures implemented in the wake of the scandal. Sarah visited Jasper one final time before returning permanently to her life and career in Vancouver. On her last day, she hiked to the ridge where Mark had spent his final moments. The forest had already begun reclaiming the clearing where the illegal operation had been centered, young vegetation sprouting among the stumps of the harvested giants. As she stood there, a park ranger approached one of the new generation hired in the aftermath of the scandal, with strengthened oversight and stricter protocols. "Ms. Donovan? Thought I might find you here." The young woman offered a small wooden box. "We found this during the rehabilitation survey of this area. Thought you should have it." Inside the box was Mark's ranger badge, tarnished but intact, discovered buried under a thin layer of soil near where he had confronted Thornton. "The new superintendent asked me to tell you something," the ranger continued. "Every ranger in Jasper now undergoes Donovan protocol training. It teaches them to question authority when environmental protections are at stake, to document everything, and to never assume the simplest explanation is the correct one." She paused. "Your brother's legacy is changing how we protect these forests." Sarah closed her hand around the badge, feeling its weight, the tangible remnant of her brother's commitment to the wilderness he loved. The truth had been buried deep, disguised beneath a convenient narrative of wilderness danger and animal aggression. But the truth, like the bear that had unknowingly begun its excavation, had eventually emerged into the light. As she made her way back down the trail, Sarah reflected on the dual nature of wilderness, its genuine dangers, alongside the more insidious threats posed by human greed. Mark had died not from the claws and teeth of a predator emerging from hibernation, but from the calculated betrayal of a man he trusted, a man willing to destroy both ancient forests and human lives to protect his criminal enterprise. The case that had begun as a presumed animal attack had revealed a different kind of predator altogether, one that walked on two legs, wore a uniform of authority, and used the wilderness itself as both weapon and hiding place. In the end, the forest had kept its secrets for 3 long years before finally surrendering the truth that had been buried beneath its floor, a truth more complex and disturbing than anyone had imagined when Mark Donovan first vanished into the silent woods of Jasper.